Parliament for Perth and Perthshire. It's absolutely fantastic to see so many people here, and I want to thank you, Rachel, for agreeing to chair this evening, and Perth for Europe for organising this event. And it comes at a very timely opportunity because, believe it or not, we're more or less only 18 months away from the United Kingdom exiting the European Union. We're beginning to better understand the government's position and its intentions when it comes around to all of this. So it's a really good opportunity just to get a sense for both me and to better understand what our constituents feel about the issues that are involved and what you feel about the way this is being progressed. I'll put my cards on the table and I'll try to put them on as sensitively and delicately as possible. I actually believe that never before in recent modern history has a nation indulged in such economic, political and cultural self-harm as the UK is currently conducting and indulging itself with leaving the European Union. To me, this seems like a sort of political and economic self-flagellation that we seem to want to beat ourselves up with as much as possible. And we're not even reaching for the smallest implement to give ourselves a good doing with. We're reaching for the biggest, most powerful tool to give ourselves that particular beating with prosecuting what can only be described as the hardest of hard Brexits. Now, I don't foresee or perceive that this could be anything other than a disaster, a disastrous project for the United Kingdom that's going to leave everybody in this room, everybody in Scotland and everybody throughout the United Kingdom significantly worse off. Now, we know a little bit about what's like economically. I'll stick on economics just now because I think it's really, really important. And there's been a couple of modellings that's been done, most importantly by the Fraser of Allender Institute, a very important and respected think tank that operates from Strathclyde University. Now, they've predicted that the costs of leaving the European Union to the Scottish nation could fall anything between £4 billion and £8 billion. The Scottish Government also did some modelling itself to see the economic cost of that, and their modelling suggests that this might cost between £3 billion and £11 billion. Now, they both sort of agree that this will cost each working man and woman in this country some £2,000, that it will set back our gross domestic product by 5%. Now, you might not want to believe the Scottish Government because of the SNP government, but we also know, because we've seen from the Treasury, we've not seen much from the Treasury rate lately because they've now bought into the Brexit project, but before the referendum, they also did some economic modelling which suggested that each household in the United Kingdom would be £4,300 worse off by the time we get to 2030. So we know that this is going to be really, really bad, and there is no reliable forecast that suggests anything other than a very strong and hard economic hit for the whole United Kingdom. And we seem to be prosecuting what could only be described as the hardest Brexit, and it's characterised by the leaving of the European single market and the customs union. That's why I call it the worst possible economic self-flagellation. There's also something you have to say about this Conservative government's approach to Brexit. And again, I'm going to try and be as delicate and sensitive as possible when I try to characterise this government's approach. And I can only say it's been prosecuted with overwhelming cluelessness and also almost national self-delusion about what it hopes to achieve and what it hopes to get out of these possible discussions. And just think about who we've put in charge of this. Boris Johnson, Liam Fox and David Davis. It's almost like putting the clowns in charge of the circus. Such is a mess that they're making. Now, we didn't know much about what was happening in Brexit. The last Parliament, all we were told was Brexit means Brexit. We do now begin to understand about the government's approach to this because they released a number of what's called position papers in the course of the last couple of weeks. You've probably seen some and I've heard them being discussed in the news. And they've given us sort of flavour about this government's approach to leaving the European Union. And it only underlines my belief in the helpless cluelessness that informs and underpins their approach to this. And I'll take one issue, and it's the customs union. Now, a lot of people don't particularly understand what the customs union is, but it does a very important and fundamental job throughout Europe. What it does is protect trade between nations within the European Union, and it has an external border, so the countries that want to trade with Europe have to pay some sort of tariffs, and it's assessed by the European Union about whether they could trade with us. It's important for ensuring that we protect businesses and industry within the European Union, and it's also an enabler. Like if countries that we support, we want to help with lower tariffs, and countries that want to punish, we might try to undercut or have unfavourable working practices, get charged a high tariff. It's a fundamentally good thing that has worked for us for years and years and years. And even the UK government recognise this, because they want to try and do what they can to protect some of the issues, interests surrounding the customs union. So they brought forward this paper which suggested two options. One was to sort of phase us out of the customs union and replace it with a seamless transition to a new featureless customs union that would allow us to continue. And the second thing we tried to suggest was to prosecute what was called a no borders customs union with the rest of the European Union. It was a sort of being in the customs union and being out the customs union at the same time. Within an hour, it was rejected by the European Union. I'm trying to find the tweet that was put forward by Guy Verhofstadt, one of the EU's chief negotiators, when he said, to be in and out of a customs union and an invisible border is a fantasy. I think, like explaining to young children about the rules and memberships of specific clubs, I think he was trying to patiently explain to the UK, you're either in or you're out. You're in or you're out of the European Union, and you're part or you're not part of things like the customs union. But this characterises the approach the UK government have adopted. And there's another thing they brought forward to a really important fundamental issue, which is the Irish border. And this is one of the priority areas for the European Union. They've put this forward as one of the priorities, along with the security of EU nationals and the divorce bill for the United Kingdom. So the Irish border is something that the EU take very, very seriously. And I'll go to another tweet which I thought was really instructive about how this is approached. And you imagine the conversation between UK and Ireland. The UK saying to the Republic of Ireland, no hard border. And Ireland saying, great. The UK saying, no sea border. And again, Ireland says, great. Then the UK says, what we actually want is a frictionless border. And Ireland asks, what, just like we have now? And the UK responds, yes, the same, but in some sort of different but yet undefined way. That sort of gets to the heart of the way that these things are approached. And then today I thought it was really, really funny, because today was the first time we had mention of the divorce bill. Now, the EU put this cost at about £69 billion, which is probably an underestimate. And the UK are refusing to engage in this. And David Davis said something important today, and he said his approach to dealing with something like the budget is constructive ambiguity. And I can think of a better definition for the cluelessness that's in the heart of this government approach to this really, really important issues. Now, I was in Brussels just before the general elections, chair of the Scottish Affairs Committee. We're doing an ongoing inquiry into Scotland's relationship with Europe. And it's a sobering experience when you're getting around the table and speaking to these very experienced EU negotiators. They could not care less what the UK wants out of this. Their only interest is theirs, and looking after the people that they represent, the people that they're charged to deal with when they're coming to negotiations. And they get frustrated and impatient with the UK, with their approach, just believing and suggesting that somehow that we can have our cake and eat it, as was seen in that famous photo shoot from Boris Johnson's office. They're getting more and more impatient with the UK. So where we're heading up, folks, is the hardest of hard Brexits. We will probably be leaving without any sort of negotiated deal with the European Union, which will put us in the worst possible place. Why are we doing this? Given the economic impact and hit we're going to sustain when it comes to this, why are we doing this? Well, we didn't decide to do this. The people of Perthshire decided they wanted nothing to do with this. The people of Scotland decided they wanted nothing to do with this. 62% of our fellow Scots decided they wanted to remain part of the European Union. But yet, we're going to be leaving the European Union in the hardest possible terms, which will have a significant impact on your living standards for everybody in this room. The reason we seem to be doing this is because other parts of the United Kingdom voted for it, very much on a false premise. The whole debate about leaving the EU became a debate about immigration. Immigration is the cold, beating heart of the case for leaving the European Union. Everything that we've since done is predicated on immigration. A poisonous debate developed in the United Kingdom about 15 years ago, propagated by the United Kingdom Independence Party, the hard right wing of the Conservative Party, and given air and oxygen by disgusting newspapers like the Daily Mail. So we now have the UK promoting immigration as one of the most significant and serious political issues. So immigration that informs everything about the debate about leaving and underpins everything that we're doing in terms of leaving the European Union now. And so we're doing all this, and it's also, I remember all these things, and everybody will remember the £350 million for the National Health Services and Boris's bus. This idea that we're taking back control from somebody that wasn't even described properly, and I had no idea who was supposed to be taking control back from and what control actually means. So we're doing all this because of all these things. Now, Scotland didn't vote for this, and we have this opportunity to look at what we want. I think we can either go along with what will become increasingly crisis, because I can't actually see the Brexit project surviving intact roughly beyond Christmas. You're already seeing it creaking at the seams. You're seeing the impatience by the EU27 and its approach in response to the UK about how they're trying to prosecute the Brexit. It's all beginning to fall apart from it. It's all beginning to become a bit of an issue. Will they continue to do it? Yes, because the Labour Party support them in all this, and because of immigration at heart. We have a lifeboat, folks. We can make our own relationship with Europe. It might be time to get that lifeboat out and go to the shores of sanity.
Thank you very much for coming out this evening. Thank you especially to Perth Europe as well for putting on tonight. As rightly said, Pete's been in the House for a number of years, longest serving Scottish MP, and I'm in my 9th week. And this is my first kind of town hall debate since being elected, so I'm looking forward to it. But thank you very much for giving us the opportunity. When the result came through on that June morning a year ago, I was gutted. I voted Remain. I campaigned for Remain. I couldn't see why Britain would be stronger outside the European Union. That was my personal view. I was gutted that we lost on the kind of 52-48 because I was quite a close result. There's only 1.3 million votes across the entire United Kingdom. And this vote was different to the usual that we have. It's different to a general election where constituencies, regions or nations matter. This one didn't. It was just about the total number of votes for Leave and the total number of votes for Remain. So if we pushed up England a bit more, Scotland or Wales more, it doesn't matter. London, I remember people on the night being like, London, it's all right. I know we had the flooding, but we're just waiting for East London to come through. And once it comes through, we're safe. There's enough people that's going to get us over the edge. They're still saying that like 5 a.m. when people start crying. I was like, I don't think it's going to happen. And it was incredibly disappointing. But I think it's important we look at just how those results came through and what it actually means. This debate really did split nations and parties. When you look at it, of the Conservatives, 40% voted to Remain. I was in that 40%. You're looking at Labour, around 60% voted for Remain. When you look at the SNP, 34% voted to Leave, which equates to about 500,000 people of the 1.3 million we needed to stay in. So it's quite interesting. Also, in the results throughout the country, you saw this split between cities and then towns and villages. So it went right the way through. You had the big ones, Glasgow, Edinburgh, London, Bristol, Bath, Liverpool, all voting Remain. And then the smaller towns and villages were voting in. And then finally you've got the kind of national splits as well. So in Scotland, 1 million Scots voted to Leave. 1.7 million voted to Remain. In England, you had 13 million English people vote to Remain and 50 million vote to Leave. Wales was 0.9 million against 0.8, and Northern Ireland was 0.4 against 0.3, obviously a much smaller population. So this referendum really wasn't a kind of national thing. It was more splitting people right down the middle, splitting parties, splitting regions, splitting towns, splitting cities, country, city. Especially coming through a more kind of rural constituency as well, on the border of a fair city. It's one that I think will be good to hear your opinions tonight, and definitely a big part of the debate. But when you look at these results, you ask the question, why? Why did Remain lose? And I spent quite a bit of time reflecting on it afterwards. I don't think the quality of the debate was that good. I think Pete was right, the 350 million on the side of the bus. I think that was right. It was using an NHS logo that wasn't allowed in campaigning, yet everyone called them out on that. The electoral authorities didn't. We also saw a number of campaigners not take part in the official Remain campaign. Jeremy Corbyn, who we've seen as such a wonderful campaigner over the last few months, didn't take part. And it's interesting that if Jeremy Corbyn had applied the energy that he just did in the general election to the European referendum, and if he'd swung just a third of the Labour voters that voted Leave to Remain, we would still be in the European Union today. And so there are a number of actors that just didn't play their part within the overall European Union debate. But finally, I think the other reason why the Remain side didn't win in this was the fact that the European Union itself is imperfect. It was one of those relationships where you kind of sit there and go along and you accept their imperfections because overall, you kind of love them. But when you actually go into there are very few organisations in the world that have an annual budget of 145 billion and yet have never passed a financial audit.
Yeah.
There are a number that have commissioners, unelected commissioners, but then spend £500,000 on expenses in 3 months. Yeah, British MPs are like frugal monks in comparison. Yeah, there are a number of issues. There's also the negotiation where the EU did very little to try and help give the appearance that Britain had had a deal, or use it as a great opportunity to say amongst the European heads of government, actually guys, we realise the institutions aren't great, we can improve them, we want to keep the UK in, here's some radical reform. David Cameron, don't rush us, but we promise you this will be more radical if we just space it out and really engage on the issue. They thought that the UK wouldn't leave, the Prime Minister at the time didn't think we'd leave, and so they rushed the discussions through, and there really wasn't much takeaway from that debate to then come back to the country and say, hey, this is great, look how Europe's listened to us. And finally, there's obviously the imperfections within the workings of the EU, the Eastern European countries who often feel underrepresented and actually saw the UK as a real ally to counterbalance against some of the other major players in Europe to make sure the European Union was a bit more balanced. So I know it's tricky tonight because as a Remainer and obviously being the Conservative Party, you can imagine I've had some pretty lively debates with a lot of my colleagues. But since coming to Parliament, I was down there, 5 weeks, and in that time I had just as many meetings with special advisors and ministers. And I'm fortunate enough, I don't need to imagine what might be going on in the rooms. I'm actually getting to see what's going on in the rooms, and the work that's going on, the detail that's going into, and the overall direction. And it's also important, I think, for me as a Democrat that I respect the result of the referendum. I cannot, in good conscience, sit there and lecture Pete on the 2014 referendum, but then myself don't accept the result of the 2016 referendum. So I'm a Democrat, people did vote to leave, and so therefore we have to leave the European Union. But in my view, I think a win-win can be achieved out of this. No one has ever left the European Union before, so it is without precedent. There's plenty of countries in the world that, and Britain did okay before it was in the European Union, and I think there are plenty of opportunities in the way the world can be afterwards as well. And actually, when you break down some of the opportunities that it presents, especially with Commonwealth neighbours, with countries outside the EU, there are real opportunities, especially with the developing world as well, where we can enter new trade negotiations, which helps us with international development, which also is not only good for trade, but also on security items too. So I think there is an opportunity there. And like I say, I voted to Remain. I thought that Britain was stronger in, but I have to respect what was a very democratic vote across the entire United Kingdom. And so if we leave, I think we can achieve a good Brexit. And we go into this hard, soft, baked, fried. I'm not quite sure which one we're going to end up with, but for me it's about getting the best Brexit we can. And that's making sure that we get a win-win for the European Union and for the United Kingdom. So what does that look like for me? Well, for me, that's first and foremost, we protect the rights of Britons and Europeans at home and abroad. We make sure we have the freest possible trade, thank you very much, freest possible trade with the European Union. I'm sure we'll get into some of that detail tonight because there's a heck of a lot there. But more than anything, we continue the cooperation on security, on science, and the environment that we've worked so hard with the European Union over the last few years. So as I think the PM said many times, yes, we're leaving the EU, but we're not leaving Europe. And there are plenty of, like I said, there was no precedent about leaving the European Union. Plenty of countries have established free trading arrangements, like Canada has. Plenty of other countries have managed to negotiate their own bespoke deals with the European Union, like Switzerland, and obviously they're a little bit smaller than we are. So I think there are opportunities. I think we respect the vote and we'll make it the best possible Brexit we can. And so I look forward to your questions. Thank you. I don't think there's, statistically there isn't a wholesale privatisation of the NHS. There's, and also, with the European Union debate, the negotiations that are happening in the free trade agreement with the European Union and the America, which obviously fell through, and when you look at the detail of that, there's a specific provision protecting national healthcare systems. It's actually written into the details of that deal and were key terms negotiated on. So certainly from my point of view, and someone who's been through the NHS and had relatives kind of live and die through it, there will be nothing that changes the NHS from my point of view. I'm committed for it being free at the point of consumption, and that is the position of the Conservative Party as well, so always be free at the point of consumption.
I'm almost tempted to respond to that in a Stephen Hawking voice, but I'll resist that temptation. I think there's a big concern just about what's going to be happening to our public services with the leaving of the European Union. I think we saw a little bit of a flavour of this with the TTIP deal. Remember some of the conversations and discussions that we're having around that, which was largely led by the Americans, who, as part of one of the TTIP solutions and resolutions they wanted, was the opening up of our public services, particularly the NHS, to more privatisation. And as we try to negotiate our own particular trade deals with a whole variety of third-party countries, these are the sort of negotiations that we're going to be getting into. We're going to have to look at what other countries want as well as us, and we're not always going to be dealing with nations that are going to be benign as we find in the European Union. There's going to be lots that are going to insist on particular deals. Now we know this current Conservative government's association relationships and how we try to build relationships. And one of the key ones is with Donald Trump. Theresa May was one of the first world leaders to go and visit her. You remember when she was holding his hand as they were walking through the White House. So I'm quite concerned about where some of these relationships and arrangements will go. Now, I'm pretty certain we'll end up in a pretty reasonable place when we do negotiate some trade arrangements and agreements. But I think TTIP stands as a warning just about how badly wrong this can go when other parties start to assert their agenda, and we can see that conversations about opening up public services to privatisation might be a feature of some of these deals that we're going to have. So, like where we've got an arrangement just now that works perfectly well for us, we're sailing into uncharted territory and we've got no idea where we're eventually going to end up, and what destination we're going to reach. Try and see if we could negotiate some sort of way through some of these comments and the question from the lady, because it's a very, very important question. And within the course of 2 years, we've had 2 very serious, significant referendums, which, as far as I'm concerned, I think engage the public in quite a meaningful way. And we do have to design a means to try and settle some of these huge constitutional questions that we are going to have to consider in the course of the future. I mean, you could leave it to Parliament, which a lot of people have suggested, and what's been proposed is that at the end of the Brexit process, there'll have to be a substantial vote, is how they call it in Parliament, whether we approve what's been agreed with the government or not. And there's no question at this stage that this will be returned to the public for them to have a say in any final decision and outcome. Now, there's a couple of political parties, most notably the Liberal Democrats, that are proposing that. And I, for one, think that there may be a further examination required by the British public. I don't know how that's achieved. I don't think it's good enough just to leave it to politicians to make that final decision. We are sovereign. That was decided in the Gina Miller case. It's up to us to make this decision. But at some point, the public are going to have to be engaged in what's going on. This is too important. And you heard what I said about the economic hit that's going to be coming your way. And I think as this whole episode becomes more and more apparent and we see some of the dangers involved, I don't know how we're going to be informed about how we respond to some of these issues in Parliament. We're going to have the Great Repeal Bill that's going to be going through. That's going to be the huge piece of legislation that we're going to have to consider, and a lot of major, big issues are going to come forward with that. But there's no other way, Madam, to solve these particular things, unsatisfactory though that may be. And we had a quota in the Scottish devolution referendum back in 1978, where there was 55% required, and that was unsatisfactory as an outcome. I think people would be certainly disappointed in that. So let's see how we design this, and I think a lot of the time that both Luke and I will be spending in the next year and a half, will be listening to you and trying to take the best possible decisions possible, and maybe at the end of that process you might be involved in a debate again.
I think it's a really good question, because it's one that we had this tradition of kind of being an indirect democracy. You have the general elections. That's the reason why MPs were under so much scrutiny, because you're putting trust in someone to represent you for the next 5 years. And we've then, over the last 2 decades or so, really invested in the kind of more direct democracy in the hope that would engage people. And I think to a certain extent it has. But I think you're quite right, looking at the terms of how we engaged. We've had these referenda. I don't necessarily, they haven't brought necessarily the country together. If anything, they've kind of split it apart more. there's often, when we go to these referendums, very rarely are people offering clear visions, exactly where they want to go. And also there's a lot of the standard debate, I think, especially in the European referendum, should have been questioned, because I think one of the problems there was timing as well. We had the negotiation in February, it was announced in March, and you had it in June. At least, to be fair, when we had the Scottish referendum, we had a good 2-year kind of run up to it. So, what papers were able to be produced, there was a lot more public debate and civic engagement. But I think when it comes to the percentages, I think you're right. If you look at some of the founders of the American Constitution, where they were looking at big changes and forming what was a new country back then, they always said they needed a kind of supermajority for those changes, for big constitutional changes in the country, through Congress. And I think for the referenda, when it is of this magnitude, I think that's right. Having it, I think it's constitutional, taking examples from around the world and having a proper debate about what that percentage is, because we don't want it to be too arbitrary, 60, 65, 70. We need to do some research into that, but actually saying, if we want big constitutional change, it should be a 65% or a supermajority, rather than just this tipping over. Because then I think then it's then incumbent on the people having the argument, one way or the other, to really win people round, or the change makers to really win people round to that change. So I would agree. I think it's something that we should look to if we do have any future referenda. When it comes to the transition cliff edge, the transition versus cliff edge, I think a transition is useful because it gives the country more time to understand the arrangements and continue some of the negotiations. Obviously, the Chancellor's indicated that he wants it for market certainty as well, which I think is always a good thing when it comes to trade negotiations. If we do have a transitional arrangement, though, I think it's very important that we detail out clear deadlines as part of that transitional arrangement, and we make sure that it is a true transitional arrangement and not fudge. And there's concerns kind of on both sides. One, the concern will be from a lot of people who voted to leave that it might not happen, and this is a way to kind of glide through it. But I think actually, concern for the Remain side is to make sure that you don't just give time for companies and others just to relocate to other parts of the European Union if the deal isn't looking that good. So I think yes to a transitional arrangement, but I think we need to be very clear about how long that transitional arrangement will be and what is to be achieved during that time period, so that businesses are brought in, communities are brought in, and the political institutions are brought in too. Yes,
I think a transitional arrangement would be ideal. I think if that's what the UK government are looking for, it's going to be very much up to the EU27 whether that's going to be allowed. And but this is the thing that I think the UK government seems to be lost and caught up in, this idea that they could just present a proposal and a plan about how these things are going to be managed and undertaken and expect the EU27 to go along. The EU27 will only agree to a transitional arrangement if they actually believe it's going to be in their interest to achieve that and secure it. That's why I believe that the cliff edge solution is probably going to be more likely. Take one example, right? The UK talking about some sort of transitional arrangement for EU nationals coming to the UK beyond Brexit, visa-free. And then, of course, the European Union sort of say, well, if we're going to be looking after the interests of European nationals within the UK, we'll require an input from the European Court of Justice, which is anathema to clear Brexiteers who see this as one of the devils of Europe and one of the things that they've been real behind. So what I observe and see is it's going to be really difficult to agree a transitional arrangement where the EU27 is going to say, well, this is our interest, this is what we want to bring, this is what we believe will look after our interests. This goes through the UK, who are doing all this because they believe that they're taking back control and being able to maintain their own borders. So where it would be, obviously, in everybody's interest to find that tapering into wherever we're going, I think it's going to be hard to negotiate, and I foresee that talks will probably break down. That's where I think we're going to be going with all this. I find it hard to see where a negotiated arrangement is going to be coming to make sure that we can do all this. And I believe that probably into the new year, we're going to be starting to see these seams really fall apart. And it's going to become apparent that I think the only option is to just leave entirely without any sort of end deal. And I think that the transitional arrangements will fall at that point.
In any negotiation, you're right, there's two parties. but also, speaking to ministers, speaking to special advisors. They're not doing this in a vacuum and then coming up to the European Union signing with a ta-da moment. They're having ongoing discussions. There's discussions with our MEPs who are still in the European Parliament. There are discussions MPs to other European MPs. There are discussions to other committees. As you rightly said, you're in the Scottish Affairs Committee. You're going over to Europe as well. So there is a loop, a feedback loop taking place in all of these negotiations. So I think the one thing is that, we're going to play our political game, that's fine, but kind of like, we can't scaremonger too much on negotiations. And I think one of the important things is of having these community discussions is you get a bit more of the front line from Parliament rather than just what you get from the press, which is obviously a lot of hype. But it's a two-way street in negotiation, and it's not being thought of in a vacuum. It is being in negotiation with the Europeans. So when these ideas, when these papers are being published, they have been informed by discussions with European counterparts to make sure they are something that they would agree to too. I mean, there's plenty of things here. The UK is the EU's largest export partner, third-party export partner, outside of the European Union, taking the figures. So there's plenty of economic reasons why they want a good deal with the UK. But more than that, because it's not just about trade. In terms of the social, in terms of the scientific arrangements they have with the United Kingdom, and also in terms of the security arrangements they have with the United Kingdom, it's absolutely in the EU's interest as well to try and have a good relationship. There will be a lot of politics, there will be a lot of sabre rattling, but at the end of the day, it's in both our interests to try and get the best possible deal and make sure that there's trade and cooperation with both EU and the UK.
No, we have the best possible deal now.
And Article 50 is 2 years to leave the European Union. This is a transitional arrangement. It's about inputting the new trade deal. That's what they're pushing for. And other arrangements. It's not that. Well, firstly, again, this is completely untried and without precedent. In terms of the Lisbon Treaty, it says that it's 2 years to leave. But then this is part of the negotiation. They're then saying to Europe, well guys, we want 2 years, but we want some traditional time. If we're saying that this is the hard, because this goes back to negotiation with the EU saying, guys, we will negotiate the kind of divorce, but we won't negotiate the settlement afterwards. Now the EU have actually shifted position on this slightly now, and there they are opening a bit more to say, actually we will have a bit more discussion about some of the other items such as trade, such as security, such as peace. So there is some movement there too. But the 2 years is about leaving, not an transition arrangement. It's what we go to next. So it is it's part of the negotiation.
We are seriously going to have to start to get real about all this. I started my remarks tonight to remind you that there's little more than 18 months before we're leaving the European Union. Now, the EU27, I heard it, and it's a sobering experience when you listen to European politicians to state here what they want, what they expect out of all these sort of things. They've only brought up 3 things just now that they want to negotiate and arrange and secure with the United Kingdom. One is important, and I hope we get to this tonight, about the rights of EU nationals within the UK and reciprocally British nationals within the European Union. They want to make sure that there will be security for that. They want to discuss the divorce bill from the United Kingdom. Now the UK are even refusing to discuss that just now, and we had this really weird term from David Davis today. And the other one's Irish border. Now, very little progress has been made on any of these 3 totem items, and yet we're starting to think that the UK could just put in place trade arrangements, and the EU are saying to them, and I don't know how the UK government doesn't hear this and doesn't hear it clearly, because if you listen to any programme, if you're on holiday, listen to some of the European Union programmes where they tell you clearly that they're not interested in dealing with this until these 3 major items are dealt with, and there is no progress being made with that at all. Now, we will have monthly discussions and negotiations with the EU27 at the beginning of every month, so in the next few weeks, David Davis's team will be going back to Europe to start to discuss these things again. The European Union will say to them once again, these are the 3 items we want clarified and negotiated before we start even thinking about anything else. And the UK government will, in its own world of fantasy island, deluded, they'll still believe that they're making progress in all these other things. They're not. Now we're approaching this really, really quickly. And I think the most important thing that the UK government could start to do is to get real about these negotiations and realise that they're up against a trading bloc, a group of 27 nations that will only and specifically work in the interests of their countries. And if you listen to European Union politicians, that's what they'll tell you. So all these things about transitional arrangements, it's just part of this delusion that the UK government seem to be embarked upon just now about how they deal with all these things. And it's, if we can't make progress in the main items, how on earth are we going to make any progress with that?
You were elected, and we've given this great opportunity, and I referred to it earlier, whereas Pete unfortunately doesn't have the opportunity to be in the room with the ministers, doesn't have the same access to the special advisors we do, but we do. And like I said, I was only down in Westminster for 5 weeks, and I met with a Brexit official or minister every week I was down there. So when you talk about fighting for Scotland, absolutely. Over recess, I've been visiting the farms in my constituency, going around and understand what they think of CAP, what we think we should do with real agricultural policy, where it should be lowlands, highlands, how do we manage field margins. Exactly, we will be getting into the detail and we will be pushing that agenda absolutely in Westminster. And the one thing, and the SNP would have felt it when they've been speaking in Parliament, because now they've got 12 other people jeering back at them, but also with our own Conservative Party, they definitely recognise the impact and the voice of Scotland. And it's, speaking frankly, it was the one bit of good news for the Conservative Party on the night of the election. So absolutely we have the opportunity, and definitely we will grab it with both hands. I promise you, we will not be meeting the room, we'll be there in every single meeting, pushing our constituency agenda and Scotland and the UK as a whole.
The Scottish Conservatives are in a really good and interesting position, given that they actually effectively hold the balance of power, given it's a parliament of minorities. And I'm not very encouraged by recent activity and actions that they've voted on so far. They could have blocked the DUP deal. The £1 billion.
Let's be clear.
Went to Northern Ireland, where Scotland got absolutely nothing. Now, all we got from Scottish Conservatives was support for this. They refused to even raise it as an issue. And Scotland was shortchanged because the usual funding arrangements of how nations are funded throughout the United Kingdom was turned on its head in order for this government to buy its support from the DUP. Now, there's a couple of big real issues. There's going to be a real challenge for the Scottish Conservatives coming up. There's a huge debate just now, as everybody knows, just about where these powers will lie. Powers to do with agriculture and fisheries. Now, according to the Scotland Act, it's all about Schedule 5. If it's not in Schedule 5, it means it goes to the Scottish Parliament. Agriculture and fisheries aren't in Schedule 5 of the Scotland Act, which means they should normally return to the Scottish Parliament and powers. Now, we've been arguing this again and again. The challenge for the Scottish Conservatives will be, in order to support us, to secure this of returning back to Scotland and observing the rules of the Scotland Act. If not, we'll have to have an amendment to the Scotland Act, which will include agriculture and fisheries being put into Schedule 5. Now, this is going to be the big challenge and test for them. There'll be other things that will come along in the Great Repeal Bill. One is the permanence of the Scottish Parliament and the idea of the Sewell Conventions about the Scottish Parliament having a say in some of the really important European pieces of legislation that we're currently in charge of the Scottish Parliament. Again, that will be a test about how the Scottish Conservatives will. But they are in a really interesting position, and we expect them to follow the Scottish national interests as they said that they would. Thus far, we've not seen any evidence of that whatsoever, even when it's things like WASPy women turning up to debates on seasonal agricultural workers. We expect them to be there and do these things and raise these issues. So the challenge for the Scottish Conservatives, represent the Scottish interests, get behind the devils to these powers truly, and make sure you do the right thing when it comes to the repeal bill.
Absolutely. I mean, in terms of speaking about Scottish interests, I mean, WASPy women obviously concerns the whole United Kingdom. And actually, one of the written questions I put forward was to the DWP about that, and the government talked about the £1 billion they've tried to put in for transitional arrangements there. So we absolutely have been fighting for those issues. When you're coming around, I mean, and to coin one of your phrases, Pete, I'll put this as delicately as I can. But what I cannot understand is the great hypocrisy from the SNP on this policy. You're shouting for more powers for Scotland, but your policy is to remain in the EU and those powers to stay in Brussels. There is nothing. So you can lecture me about saying, and damn right I will. We will be in that room.
The EU handle on welfare?
We'll be in the room. We'll be in the room. We'll be in the room fighting for those, fighting for powers, making sure the UK as a whole has powers, making sure we have frameworks that work for Scotland and work for the entire United Kingdom. We will definitely work for that. But like I say, your policy is to keep the powers in Brussels. They won't even get to Westminster and the SNP.
That's what you wanted. That's what you voted for, the SNP.
With the democracy point first, I'm saying that, that's just by virtue of the fact that my party's in government, and so in the same way that in the Scottish Parliament, Nicola and John aren't asking Ruth and Murdo to come to every meeting when it comes to budgets, so the same thing in Westminster. However, Pete and I do talk in and outside of Parliament, and obviously we're in a lot of debates together, and any of the proposals are public and in the Commons as well, so the SNP definitely get the opportunity, and the people who vote in this constituency get the opportunity to scrutinise all those government proposals. The dumping point is a really good one because being members of the European Union hasn't stopped dumping. It hasn't stopped the dumping of Chinese steel. It hasn't stopped the dumping of several other Asian products that have come over where they've been mass produced and then coming to the EU. So actually, this is one of the areas where being separate from the EU may give us an opportunity to tailor policies a little bit more for the UK, to actually potentially protect a little bit more, or certainly give us more nuance and a few more levers to pull in those negotiations with those countries. Whereas in the EU, we obviously have to go for an EU-wide policy, and like I say, that hasn't stopped the dumping of things like Chinese steel.
Will the Conservatives ban hormone-treated beef from the United States? Will they make an outright ban of that? I don't want my children and my grandchildren eating hormone beef. And the UK government frequently just say, USA, whatever you say, pal.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I'm not the Secretary of State for Agriculture, so I can't make that promise to you tonight. But when you're looking, we need to make sure that we've got great environmental standards and food standards in the United Kingdom, and we need to make sure that they're upheld. So we're raising other people's standards, not dropping ours.
Thanks for that question. There is an issue to do with dumping, of course, and we've seen that repeatedly. And I think Luke mentioned steel, and that's with all the issues round about Wales where the steel plants are going, and that's become a part issue. I can't see how it would improve leaving the European Union. That's the only thing I'd say. And I think one of the issues that's come forward in the course of the past few weeks is not so much the hormone beef, but the chlorinated chickens that we're likely to be left with a particular trade deal with the United States. And I think we've just got to be ever vigilant when it comes to these things, and to say that we have got something in place now, regardless of its flaws, that seems to work for the country. And if we are going to be going forward in these particular trade deals, that we do get the best possible result. But the idea of chlorinated chicken frightens the life out of me, and I don't know what everybody else feels about that here. But these are the sort of issues and terrain that we're now starting to venture into. Isn't it so sad? We've got a current range of arrangements that seem to work reasonably well for us. We know what to expect. We know the safety of our food. A lot of that's to come from the European Union. We're just throwing it all away. Throwing it all away for what? To make us poorer, to impoverish us. The whole mission of this doesn't make any sense at any sort of level. I'm still waiting, and listening to Luke, and I'm listening to some of you guys here. There's one good reason about why we're doing this, and I rack my brain trying to think. I know we read something about fishing and the fishermen of Scotland would be better off, maybe, and I'll hear all the stuff from the Scottish Fishing Federation. But then I'll listen to Philip Hammond just last week to say, once again, Scottish fisheries will be on the table for negotiations. And it just makes it all so worthless and such a lack of energy and exercise. And I'm really concerned about where our nation's going to be going with all this, because all the things that you raise could come to pass. And it's quite a scary prospect that we're facing here. I'm looking for the opportunities. I'm encouraged to look for the opportunities. I'd like to think that they exist. But somebody's going to have to tell me what they are, because I'm not seeing any yet. All I'm seeing is 11 billion pounds sucked out our national economy.
I think the chlorinated chicken, this is almost a bit of an apolitical point, but the chlorinated chicken debate is an interesting one. It's one we should always try and look at some of the evidence about this. I'm not defending chlorinated chicken here, but in our goods now, and sorry, this is a bit of a geeky coming from my background, but the salad bags that a lot of people have, most of those leaves are washed in chlorinated water. That's part of standard food preparation. And so when they're talking about chlorinated chicken, it sounds horrific, but actually, again, in looking at our own standards, quite a bit that happens in the UK already in different forms. So this one, as we go through some of the trade and other negotiations, I think we need to make sure we get the detail and we do look at the standards properly. In terms of the opportunities, I mean, as I've gone through before, yes, there'll be some trade opportunities. Yes, it opens up doors that have been closed for years, like I said, in the Commonwealth and a lot of the developing world. And one of the key things that has come out about this, and again, bear in mind I'm a Remainer, I wasn't there chomping at the bit to leave, but when you're looking at some of the coffee exports from Africa, and actually when they look in the round at the actual value and where that's going from, Germany's making more from African coffee than Africa is. Because again, because of the customs union, because of the tariffs placed on African production. So Europe is, and I don't know if any of you were school kids as well, they're teaching you about the EU, and they're talking about the butter mountains and the stockpiling and a lot of the barriers, which are great for the European Union actually, but not that great for developing countries. So I certainly see one of the opportunities of leaving the EU is the fact we can engage more with some of the developing countries and work with the Commonwealth and look at other nations as well, so we have more of a value and more fair trade agreements.
How we're going to do that, and these are figures which, like the whole of the UK is rested with. I think that your substantial point just about the common agricultural policy, we've not got into issues to do with agriculture just now, and I'll try and deal with that, because I know I've been asked to be really quickly about this. Now, I represent a rural constituency. Farmers have been told that they will secure the common agricultural payments up to 2020, and beyond that, they're likely to receive no more funding from the UK government. They're prepared to be up to that point. Michael Gove has sort of suggested that if farmers can demonstrate good green practice, it might be of a view to support them and give them some subsidy beyond that. But like my farmers are now coming to me because they see the real dangers in all this. They don't know where they're going to get the labour for the berry farms, which are critically important for the whole of Perthshire, Angus, and most of the growing areas of Scotland. There's a real cut-off point and a real danger unless we get this addressed that farmers that I represent could be hit really, really badly. And I think more and more farmers overwhelmingly voted to leave the European Union, which is one of the most curious and perplexing decisions that any group would make, given all it is further self-harm, back to this flagellation issue again. And we cannot understand it, but they're now beginning to see the real dangers in all this. And I think that this is why we say we need the powers and authority over agriculture, so that we can start to make some of our own decisions about that as we go forward. And I think that's why Luke's in a position with his colleagues in the Scottish Conservatives to make sure we get that, because we're in a real danger of our farmers facing their own green agricultural cliff edge unless we get that resolved.
For the farmer side, the payments are quite it's guaranteed to 2022 is what the commitment they've made. But I think when you speak to a lot of farmers as well, they're not enthralled with the common agricultural policy. Don't get me wrong, this is like a direct quote. Don't get me wrong, I'd never say no to the money. But the problem is all the regulation that comes with them, and the crop rotation, the field rotation, all the regulations that are stacked on them, actually they do see it as a bit of an opportunity. So in terms of saying they're committing the act of self-harm, you're right, quite a few of them did vote to leave, but I think they also see an opportunity on the other side, and it's for us to try and deliver that. When it comes to actual statistics, you're right. I mean, I think that when it comes to the overall national debt, that is a problem. That's why we've had all the kind of reduced deficits that have taken place over the last few years, and that's not without pain. But actually, just one of the stats that is quite interesting is when you look at the balance of payments, and when you're looking at our overall trade deficit, with the rest of the world, we actually have a trade surplus because of our service industry. These are all statistics on the Office of National Statistics, Q4 2016, if you want to reference them. But they have they have a surplus. But our trade with the European Union is always at a deficit, and has been for a number of years. Again, because that's the mix of goods that we bring in from the EU and services. So again, we've had some currency revaluation already, because obviously the pound's dropped, and so already this has started to tilt a little bit. And obviously, if you get your kind of if you help the trade deficit, that will hopefully in turn help our overall financial debt and annual deficit. So there are some movements here in the Brexit process that will actually help, or could potentially help, but we've got to make sure that we do make the most of those opportunities and that we don't just squander them in the whole negotiation process.
Thank you. It's great that so many people here this evening and we're able to have what I think has been a reasonable discussion just about some of the issues to do with Brexit. This is going to consume us for the next year. Like, when we get back to Parliament, we'll start to see the Great Repeal Bill. I think we've got 2 days in Parliament to start to debate it. So this is the next feature that we're going to have in order of our legislative programme about leaving the European Union. I'm pretty certain we're going to see some more of these position papers come forward across the next 2 weeks, 3 weeks, several months, just to see the UK's position when it comes to a number of these particular issues. But I'll go back to a couple of things that I'll make. But I think the UK government really has to sort of face up to the realities of the situation that we're in. I think they have to start to take seriously the position in the European Union 27 who are there to make sure that they're exclusively negotiated for and they're looking after the interests of the nation. And I don't think we're seeing much evidence of that just now. And I think we're going to have a thought about what we do in Scotland now. We tried to, as much as possible, accept the UK-wide result when it came to the European Union referendum. We saw that the UK decided to leave, and as part of that kingdom, I think we accepted that Scotland would be leaving the European Union on that basis. What we then produced was a plan from the Scottish Government which sort of met the UK-wide result, but at the same time tried to put forward the Scottish interest. You know, the fact that we, as a nation, overwhelmingly voted to remain within the European Union, and we have a particular attachment to Europe, therefore, which we'd like to be maintained. So we put forward Scotland's Place in Europe paper, which was suggested that one of the ways to negotiate this would be we'd have a differentiated deal for Scotland that would allow us to remain within the European single market, and then be part of the UK, and the UK leaving the European Union, encourage as much as possible the UK government to remain within the customs union, and therefore we deal with the worst aspects, the worst madness of leaving the European Union, because the single biggest issue that's going to hurt us when we leave the European Union is leaving the most successful common market that's ever existed in the history of the world, the European single market. And that is really going to hurt us. Most of the economic pain that I described to you earlier is as a product coming out of that European single market that's going to hurt us. That proposal that we put forward didn't even last a day on the tables of government ministers, who rejected it out of hand almost immediately, saying that there'd be no differentiated arrangement for Scotland and we would be dragged off the cliff edge along with the rest of the United Kingdom, regardless how we voted here. Now, I've heard Luke mention the word democracy on several occasions, as have other people here. I want to respect the views of the people of this country, but the people who will come first for me, and come first for me always, are the people of Perthshire, and how they voted, and what they wanted, and what they're saying to me about this future progression. I will continue to try and get the best possible deal as we propose, as we venture to leave the European Union. I'll continue to argue till I'm blue in the face that we need to be in the customs union, that we need to be in the European single market. But if we're not being listened to, we have to seriously consider what we do. My view is that this shambles will quickly come apart. The wheels are already beginning to rattle round, and they will start to come off about Christmas time. You're in a situation, in a position with a great interest in this. You wouldn't be here if you didn't have an interest. You've got to start to think about your options. You've got to start to think about what's best for your family, your kids, and future generations. We either go along with this project, which to me is absolute utter madness, and I've yet to hear one reason about why we're doing this, one positive reason why we're doing this. You have options, and we have, as a nation, we can make our own decisions about how we do this. We go along with the United Kingdom, which is overwhelmingly focused on immigration to drive our national debate, or we say we could do things differently. Brexit is the exact opposite of what Scotland needs in order to go forward economically, politically, and culturally. We've got to get that message communicated as much as possible to the Scottish people. But we have options. We have got that HMS lifeboat, which is currently strapped to sinking UK Brexit. We can jump onto this lifeboat, paddle as fast as we possibly can to the shores over there, where we make our own decisions, where we get out of this absolutely utter disaster that we're heading for, because this ship that we're currently attached to is heading for a huge iceberg, which is only going to be appearing right in front of us in 18 months. Please, people, think about the options, the powers that you have to make alternative decisions. Don't just go along with this disaster. Don't just say, I'll just put up with this and we'll see how it works out later down the line. Make decisions on behalf of yourselves, your families, your community, and your nation. Get on that lifeboat. Get to the shores of sanity and make decisions for ourselves.
Firstly, just thanks very much for coming along tonight. Sometimes you hold these community meetings and no one turns up, and thanks to the promotion for Perth for Europe, a lot of people have got sold out, so thank you very much. When we're talking, Pete, in your summation there, you talked about Britain and the UK government facing its responsibilities and facing the reality of the situation we're in. I couldn't agree more. I think we do have to do that. But I think also yourself and your colleagues in the SNP need to face that reality as well. When it comes to about saying having the Scotland in the single market and the rest of the UK out, that is la-la land. And that's not what Westminster said, that's what Europe said. Europe pushed that proposal back, not Westminster. So the issue is you're fighting kind of two sides here, and I think you're quite right, you do represent people in Perthshire, as do I, but also we have to represent in our constituencies that number of people that voted to leave, 1 million Scots voted to leave, and as I outlined tonight, I think it pretty clearly shows this isn't a Scotland versus England thing, this is right down the middle of the country. I mean, go to London, go to Bristol, people are fuming. And when I've been down in Westminster, you go and meet some people, get on the topic of Europe, and they want London to be separate from the rest of the UK. It's right the way this cuts through. It's not a national thing. The lifeboat on the side isn't HMS Scotland and cruising away. It's about getting involved, getting in the room, fighting for what we believe is right, and making sure we get the right deal out of this negotiation. And that's absolutely what I will be doing, elected in my constituency. But also remembering that, like I say, 1 million Scots also voted to leave. A lot of discussions we had tonight, quite frankly, there were a lot of fears about the Brexit process. There are a lot of concerns that people have, and that's completely valid. I hold them too. But the simple fact is that through the negotiations, through the research, through at least the government are now producing position papers that clearly state possible solutions for each of the problems they're going into. So when we're talking about trade, they look at the Canadian model that was just approved with the EU recently, where they've got, rather than doing the ECJ, they've got an arbitration model which is binding on both parties. So there are opportunities there. There are international trade agreements, there are international cooperation agreements the EU has with other countries. If you're looking at Switzerland, Norway, Iceland, especially Switzerland, it was able to negotiate its own bespoke position within Europe through the EFTA. So it's great that we have these debates. We will be in there fighting tooth and nail for the constituency, for the people, also for Scotland and the United Kingdom to make sure we get the best deal from Brexit. And if you don't like the direction it's going into, and certainly, I hear a lot of the comments you're making tonight. And we've got offices, anyone who's in my constituency, we've got offices in the constituency, my email, then let me know, come forward with proposals, because I'll make sure they're put forward, and I'll make sure absolutely they are argued in government, so not from the sidelines, but actually in government. And the way we make Brexit a success is not diving in a boat and rowing away, but it's actually pulling together, making sure we get the possible deal for Britain as a whole. We can unite the country more and then move forward and be more prosperous and safer afterwards. Thank you.